Brett and Mark here. If you are able to join us live in real time, drop comments in. And if you're catching this live recording of this live stream, you're welcome just as well. The whole idea is that it's an ongoing conversation.
Like Brett said, it's an ongoing conversation. We're experimenting with a different way to do this in format, and we just want to be sure that there are as many ways as possible that you can engage and interact with the material that we're going to present to you. Yeah. All right. Rapid leadership development. Brett, you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so that's the theme, rapid leadership development. When y'all responded and questions that you've been asking, there's a lot of enthusiasm about being a better leader, becoming more effective, being more successful, motivating your team, holding people accountable, getting those results. However, as we're going to see today, it's very confusing. And if you go out and read books and watch videos, you end up more confused than when you started. And so today is about how we can rapidly improve our leadership performance. And I mean days and weeks. And in just a few months, your boss and your coworkers can be thinking, wow, man, they're really leading. And that's what we're going for.
And we are so glad that you are here, because your being here is an investment in your unique journey into leadership. And we want to be part of that journey. And we want to begin to connect what we've learned with your stories. And you have a voice, you have a very unique voice. And Brett and I are here to help guide and curate and bring out the best in that voice. So I'm very, very excited, and we're going to get into it.
Yeah, and we're eager to hear your comments. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the questions that kind of inspired today's live stream. So things we're discussing today: what would make you a more successful leader? And that's the $64,000 question, as they used to say. What will make you a more successful leader? And then, but we're going to say, what do successful leaders actually do? And I'm going to give you like a 4-minute crash course on what the most successful leaders actually do, which is kind of cool. And then what works and what doesn't work in leadership education, and how you can apply what works. And in other words, how can you get the most out of not only this leadership learning community, but all of your efforts to improve your leadership performance. So let's start with that first question. What would make you a more successful leader? And Mark, throw a few things out there that you've been seeing in the group and that you're aware of in terms of things that people are suggesting would make them a more successful leader.
Yeah, and one thing that I just noticed, even in the questions that we looked at and reviewed, is that, and for everybody to see, there's a theme in all this, right? There's a theme that the leadership itself isn't really, it's an open question. And so when you're asking this question to yourself, what makes me a more successful leader? Part of the anxiety is, well, we don't really have a good working definition of what leadership is. I think these things would make me a better leader, but also there's this broader dysfunction out there. So I want you all to just hold that in mind as you begin asking what would make me a successful leader, and you're sort of dealing with this tension out in out in the world of work. Also, there's a lot of dysfunction. So generally speaking, there isn't a lot of good definition of what that is.
Totally. And that really tees up some of the slides. I appreciate that. And then another question is, what aspects of leadership do you want to get better at? And so a lot of things that I hear is, how do I motivate people? How do I hold people accountable? How do I get my team to perform? How do I get people to care more and to be more engaged in some way? I'm uncomfortable with difficult conversations or conflict. And then the other thing is, what frustrations and problems are you facing? And so that's another good way to think about it. What's difficult? What's frustrating? What's demoralizing? What's draining? What makes it sometimes feel overwhelming, or all that pressure that we sometimes feel, and that responsibility, and we're not always sure what the best move to make is.
Again, part of this, and I look at this question, part of the frustrations and problems, part of what Brett and I saw, we're going to tease this out a bit, is there's no standard of what leadership is. What is leadership? Is it behaviors? Is it certain kind of qualities? Is it a skill? There's no consensus on what it is. So some of the frustration that you ultimately end up feeling is because there is no standard. There's no one definition. And what Brett and I want to do that's very different here is begin to develop a standard, something that you can hang your hat on.
Love it. I love it. So the big question then is, what do successful leaders actually do? And we're going to actually answer that question. And so first, they set the goal, the destination, and then they create a plan to get there, right? So that's sometimes called direction setting. And clearly, a leader that's not going anywhere or doesn't have any kind of plan, it's not really, considered to be leading in the strict sense of that word. The second thing they have to do is they have to pull together a group of engaged and motivated individuals who can coordinate their efforts to get the work done, to get there, to get to that goal, or to, get to that destination, right? So it's real logical the way we lay it out in our books and courses at the Integral Leadership Academy. And the third thing that effective leaders do is they have to make sure that that plan actually gets implemented. They have to hold people accountable. They have to manage expectations. They have to keep people productive. And so sometimes that's called like performance management. But it's not just enough to have the plan and like motivate people. You've got to actually manage people, and you've got to implement a project plan. And it's not just enough to have an idea and go rah, rah. That's where also project management comes in. So in other words, if we simplify it, and we love to simplify things so that you can get good at it. I'm reminded of like basketball, dribbling, passing, shooting, rebounding. You practice, whatever skill that you're learning, you need to know what the fundamentals are. I'm a fan of like the UFC and MMA, and there's kickboxing and there's wrestling. And then there's the ground game called grappling or jiu-jitsu. And so you have to have all three. Well, as we're going to see, leadership is exactly the same way. Planning, teaming, and executing. That's it. And so you might be great at one or two and not so great at the third. And so we need to make sure that as leaders, we're well-rounded enough that we can dribble, we could pass, we can shoot, we can rebound. If we go into the MMA and we're good at wrestling, but we can't box, well, we're just going to get knocked out. And so, that's what happens with leaders. Most all of you are already really good at one of these. Many of you are good at two of them, but most of you, and it'll be different for different people, never really got a lot of training. And maybe no one even told you what those specific skills and techniques were. They never taught you to rebound.
That's right.
And so that's so powerful. Do you want to add anything here?
Well, I love that, Brett, because, in my experience, leadership is assumed. People get in certain roles or positions, and it's just assumed that they know what to do. Again, this is our culture. This is our historical culture around how we implement, how we view our perspective on leadership is very intangible. What Brett and I are doing here is bringing that out of the clouds,
that's right,
bringing it down to earth and making it a very tangible thing. And you'll see this in the slides, because you can't improve what you can't see and what you can't measure. Right. This gives us measurables. This gives us pillars, something we can, again, hang our hat on. And it's very, very simple.
And once we need to practice our free throws or practice our passing or our dribbling, all we have to do is practice it for a few weeks and we've got it. But if no one's ever told you the technique or even what the techniques are or how to practice it, then you're kind of dead in the water. And that's one of the reasons that leadership is such a murky, kind of confusing, muddied water thing. So this is just part of the universal leadership model. And so there's our planning, executing, and teaming. And we like to think of these as the three inherent responsibilities of leaders. All leaders in every culture, we have people all over the world that are our students in, both our nonprofit and in the corporate world and so on. And no matter where you find leadership, it doesn't matter what you're leading. You're going to have the responsibility, if you're the leader, of planning and of teaming and executing, just like we talked about before. But what very few books break down is, if these are three inherent responsibilities, you could also think of them as abilities: the ability to do planning, the ability to do teaming, and the ability to do executing. Well, the ability to do wrestling and the ability to do kickboxing and the ability to do jujitsu or grappling is made up of techniques, also called skill sets.
Mhm.
And so each of these has 3 skill sets. And so that's what you're going to see in the training material. There's 3 skill sets for planning, there's 3 skill sets for teaming, and there's 3 skill sets for executing. And you're probably already good at 1 or 2 in each dimension. You could also say those are 3 dimensions of leadership. And so you're already good at some of these, but there might be 1 or 2 that you've received very little training on or coaching, and you might not even be able to name the techniques. And so that's a big part of how we can really do rapid leadership development. And there's one other thing too. You don't need to go through and learn every single technique and every single skill set of all 9. You mainly need to focus on the ones that you're not strong in yet, that you haven't received, because you're already pretty good. You wouldn't be in a leadership position if you couldn't do a lot of this already. You can do a lot of this already pretty good. And some of these things you're fantastic at, you're an absolute ace at. And that's awesome. We want to, build on that. But the way you actually improve your leadership performance is counterintuitive. It's not focusing on your strengths. Focusing on your strengths is good advice if you're in your 20s and you don't know what your abilities are. You have no clue what your gifts and talents are. You don't know what your values and your virtues and the thing called strengths are. Those are actually values and virtues in positive psychology, but some people call them strengths. If you don't know that, that's helpful. Focus on your strengths to get to know yourself. But man, when you're a manager, the answer is not to focus on your strengths. That's what got you there. That's why you got promoted. But to be a good, effective leader, you actually focus on the 1 or 2 or the 3 skill sets and specific techniques inside those skill sets that you're not good at or you can't do at all. And so it's a little counterintuitive. And a lot of the things that we do here in the Integral Leadership Academy is counterintuitive. If you've been asking, why is it so confusing? Why is leadership so confusing? Why is it that I've gone to a leadership training and didn't improve my leadership at all? My team invested in leadership training and we didn't see any impact. So I want to mention this. I've written several books on this, but I'm just going to highlight it very quickly. What works and what doesn't in leadership education. There's a whole book on what doesn't work. That's called Bogus Leadership. And then Accelerating Leadership is all the details, this book, about how to do rapid leadership development. That's a 300-page book on rapid leadership development. And then Integral Leadership, and then Reinventing Leadership. And the cool thing about Reinventing Leadership, 1, you have a free copy as a member of this community. And 2, I created a video training. You don't even have to read the book. You can if you want to, but you could also just watch the short video training to get that. So the first thing that I want you to be aware of is why most leadership development programs fail. And that is because of the knowledge skill transfer gap. You can Google it. It's a whole thing. There's all these studies on it. Very little of what is learned in a classroom or a seminar setting, like a leadership seminar at Harvard for a week or a 3-day leadership seminar. Very little, very, very little is actually retained because the knowledge and skill does not transfer from the classroom or the offsite retreat into the day-to-day job.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem. Now, the fact is that adults typically retain 10% of what they hear in classroom lectures versus an average of 60%, nearly 2/3 of what they hear and are introduced to when they learn it by doing it in action. Kids memorize, adults learn by doing. And so this is called practice-based learning. And we invented practice-based leadership development 23 years ago. And we're still the main ones doing it. It's been adopted by some organizations, but not nearly enough. And so that's the key, is treat these as techniques and practices, and you can learn them quickly. So the next big idea regarding what works and doesn't work is there's only one way to learn a complex skill, like leadership, or playing a musical instrument, or playing basketball, or football, or flying an airplane. And the cool thing is that you've already learned many complex skills in your life. You've learned basketball, football, volleyball, baseball, playing a musical instrument. Maybe you play the piano, maybe you play the violin or the guitar, etc. You've been learning complex skills your whole life. There's only one way to learn a complex skill: to break it down into specific techniques, then practice them until they become habit, then layer more on until they mature into skill sets. Complex skills like playing a musical instrument or learning a sport is made up of multiple smaller skill sets, and each skill set has techniques. And that's what you're going to learn here at the Integral Leadership Academy. The other thing I want to mention is failure to measure behaviors. Mark mentioned this earlier. Peter Drucker said you can't improve what you don't measure. 90% of leadership coaching and training programs don't measure skill improvement because they don't treat leadership as a complex skill. Therefore, they fail to break training outcomes down to concrete behaviors and don't establish measurable benchmarks. There are very few places outside of our books and the Integral Leadership Academy that provide actual benchmarks of what does it look like at a low level of proficiency, medium and high, in all of the leadership abilities and all the 9 skill sets. And then the other thing I want to mention is context. That means circumstances, different leadership circumstances and situations. Most leadership training and coaching and most books on the subject ignore context. They ignore the circumstances and the situation, but there's no one size fits all leadership. Mark mentioned that earlier. The effectiveness of any leadership approach is based on the context, the different circumstances, and especially the different followers and the team cultures, because that's going to determine what kind of leadership is going to be effective. And so this is very important, and it's fundamental to the approach to rapid leadership development that we do that has been working very well for the last 23 years. And the last thing I'm going to mention is using the wrong style destroys leadership credibility. One of the biggest mistakes leaders make is they use their favorite style of the type of leader that they like to follow. But their followers all have a different definition in their mind of what effective leadership is. Some of those leaders think effective leaders are inclusive and all the employees, even the brand new employees who don't know anything, should have a say in every decision. But yet, other people really feel like the leader should just tell them what to do and make sure that, everybody follows the rules. And that's good leadership. And other people think the leader is the one with the most expertise, right? And that's the leader. Well, that's very confusing. And if you use the wrong leadership style with the wrong people, it gives them the impression that you're not a good leader, according to them. So let me explain. Leadership credibility is subjective. In the same way that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, leadership is in the eye of the follower. Leadership is in the eye of the follower, not the leader. Who's the person who assesses if that leadership is good? The leader or the followers? It's the followers. So different followers view different leadership styles as credible or not credible. You have to use the style that's resonant with your followers, and if you want to be seen as credible in their eyes. So that requires more, explanation to learn. I wrote a whole book on it called The Leadership Rosetta Stone. Did you want to add anything to these 5 insights about rapid leadership development and what works and what doesn't work, Mark?
No, I think, Brett, it's very exciting. This is a wonderful foray. And I think as Brett went through the slides, you're starting already to get the sense that this is different. We have mapped out the landscape of what leadership looks like. And that's a very first important, credible step that I think separates what Brett and I do from what's out there in the field, is that what does this leadership actually look like? We're all looking at the same thing. So we have the geography and the map, and now we can go to those places more specifically when you get involved in our work, and you can begin to build a credible sense of, okay, this is my game. Like Brett mentioned, like my basketball game, this is my schema. This is, like offensive coordinators will have, they have a game plan. So this is my game. This is my game plan. I understand it. I understand what I have to work on. And like we said, we try to make as much material as possible available for you to start to get this in your skin, get this in your bones, really embody it, what we're trying to talk about here, so that you feel leadership. But then it's not just about trying to look the part. It's a very tangible thing that you can work on. You can work on your game, things like imposter syndrome and, what are traditional sort of hangups about leadership start to go away, because this is something you can improve. This is something you can see. It's something you can touch and feel. Now it's tangible. No longer up here, intangible. It's something you can get and feel. So we are very excited and encourage you to dive into the materials that Brett's provided. Yeah. Everybody, like Brett mentioned, engage with us. This is an ongoing conversation. We want to create a sense of continuity here And like I said earlier, you're going to start to notice a theme. So we want you to stay open to this and also just be aware. There's a self-awareness component to this, but you'll start to see that a lot of you are aligned already in this community in terms of you have the same questions, you'll have the same concerns. And, we just think it's really going to galvanize your time here, and you're going to get a lot out of it.
Thanks again for your time. I know your time is very valuable. Everybody's busy as leaders, so appreciate your attention and your time, and we'll be in touch. Talk to you soon.
See you
Bye.
soon. All right, everybody. See ya.